within the project, we conduct some interviews. We first set up a general database composed by more than 220 case studies, from which we selected 45, around 45, between 45 and 50 cases to interview in detail. From these 45 cases, we conduct 15 surveys on urban policies or municipal policies, and the other 30 cases were conducted on communities of citizens or citizens initiatives. The field work was conducted between February and May the last spring. And just to, I think that it's needless to say, but it's should be remarked that the results we are going to present and to discuss this afternoon are telling us just the shared or the common trends, the common features, and not the particular cases or the particularities of each cases. Otherwise, it would be a maze. The survey, it's both the survey conducted on urban policies and on communities of citizens, are divided along five different sections. The first one is about sociodemographic locations and thematic areas, of course. The second section is regarding technology and communication issues. The third section it's about the funding and the legal issues. And the fourth and the five sections are regarding the organization and the participation models or designs. And the last section, the fifth one, it's about the general issues that our respondents would introduce by themselves. So I'm in charge of presenting the main findings or the main results belonging to the first and the second section. And after me, Antonio, it's going to present the third, the fourth, and the fifth results. So very briefly, I'm going to share with you the screen. Just give me a second. Here you are. Here you are. Are you able to see the screen? Okay, perfect. So let's move to the first, very briefly, to the first. Here we are. So here we are about the general data about sociodemographic location and thematic area. It should be noted that most of communities of citizens or citizen initiatives are located in the city centers and are performing their activities in buildings rather than in the outskirts of the cities and in open areas. Most of they are legal entities, but usually this is as a formal requirement to be able to interact with the public institutions or even the private ones. They are composed generally as a trend, they are composed by less than 50 members, although there are some initiatives in which the number of participants is quite hard to grasp. They members, and this is a general trend, they members are usually locally born and from the dominant or the most quantitative dominant ethnic groups in respect to newcomers or other ethnical groups. And the most observed thematic areas have to do with culture and arts education, social hubs, grassroots movements, and etc. Regarding the urban policies, they are implemented majority at municipal level rather than being part of a national or regional broader political program. They are not targeted on a specific objective group or objective beneficiaries. They are more opened, let's say, and not targeted. They are mostly related with culture, participation, public heritage, etc., and mostly in relation with the regeneration of open areas or even on building management. The urban spaces in which these policies are implemented are usually benefit from the implementation, both as a physical spaces by experiencing some physical improvement, but also the inhabitants' well-being and cohesion should be benefit or tend to be benefit from these urban policies. Regarding the technology and communication staff, it should be noted that uh, um, most of activities are conducted by communities of citizens are full opened. They are not targeted. They are usually for free and they are physically performed. Although, of course, needless to say, the COVID crisis has altered these patterns. Therefore, word of mouth and face-to-face remains as the core feature of the communication patterns and the kind of activities. However, it should be noted that internet and technology, in general, technology uses are quite frequent for sure, but they are more used as an individual activity rather than as a collective one. On the other hand, urban policies, we observe that the use of technology and digital tools is quite scarce, and they are used quite on a unidirectional way, used to inform and not to engage or foster new participation. So these two last points, at least to me, should be analyzed in more detail. Antonio would follow my presentation by presenting the results on the funding and legal status. Antonio, the floor is open.
Thank you very much, Bru. So yes, another part of our survey was dedicated to funding and legal status, and in general to the political and legal issues at the cornerstone of the commons in the European area. With respect to funding, and I mean, before getting into all the results, what I would like to say is that is one of those typical cases in which some of our findings were very different from what we were expecting to find, which is, of course, something that many times happens with respect to research. And indeed, one of the findings which surprised us the most was to find out that most of the commons initiatives in Europe are mostly funded by public grants and contributions. And this is quite significant in the sense that other sources of funding, mainly, for example, crowdfundings within the groups, or even online crowdfunding, an innovative way of getting funds, are not a very common way of funding of these initiatives. Which somehow it is a finding that suggests that this kind of initiatives and the commons initiative do actually create most of the times a peculiar way of partnership between public administrations and community, rather than actually communities themselves acting on their own or only on their own without any communications with the public sector. With respect, of course, we have also found that with respect to the legal status of the commons, and this confirms what we have just said, that more of the 90% of the goods in which the commons experiences are based are public goods. Namely, they're not owned by the community, and most of the times they're owned by the municipality, owned by other public sector. Although, of course, we can find a minor number of cases in which it is the owner of the building, it's a private owner. We also have to say that we do have certain cases in which the commons are not based in one specific space, because they are more of initiatives which foster or promote the activation of different communities around their cities. And we can come back to this later on, maybe in our discussion, since I see many of these communities who here today can give examples of these kinds. And especially it was very true in some cities such as Brussels, and that's why I think we can come back to this soon. And most of the times, the communities are linked to the public administrative owner of the good in which they're based through a formal legal contract, like a free concession or a rental agreement. But we can also find some kind of de facto arrangement in which the public actor tolerates the presence of the community within the good, without although having a specific agreement. Or in some cases, we also have illegal occupation, where, of course, the relationship between the community, the good, and the administration is characterized by a conflict. With respect to the urban policing sides, even here we're expecting to have many cities, or at least some cities, in which commons policies, urban policies related to commons, were funded by specific lines of funding, but we have noticed that most of the times municipalities rely on regular funding resource or regular line of fundings, or, and this is was quite surprising, on specific European sources of funding. With due respect, we do see how many times municipalities use European programs and European fundings to promote commons initiatives more than putting those monies in other kinds of initiatives. With respect to urban policies, more of the issues would be of a bureaucratic and legal nature, but I'll come back to this when we'll get to the specific issues that the commons initiatives and communities bring about with respect to the law. I think we can switch slide. Thank you, Bro, very much. So I think this would be another interesting point to stress. What we have noticed with respect to the communities of citizens with regard to specific issues of organization and participation is that usually we can find a kind of distance between the legal form and the actual operation of the institution. As a lawyer, I was very much prone and very much expecting that I would find communities structured in some kind of a legal form, and that this kind of a legal form would perfectly mirror or reflect the actual and current organization of the communities. Well, this is not what actually happens. What actually happens is that, of course, there are certain experiences, and Hotel Pasteur, for example, is one of those experiences, in which you do have a very sophisticated legal structure. Let's think also to community land trusts, for example, a very sophisticated legal structure which actually mirrors the everyday working of the organization, which structures a very democratic and participatory governance, and this governance is actually formalized within the formal organization of the entity. But in many, many cases, and I would say most of the cases, the legal form is an empty shell. It's just a way that communities use in order to be able to take part to public grants, to have a legal status which would allow them to sign documents, to hire, if needed, employees, and for these kind of formal things. But what is written in the bylaws and in the articles of association does not mirror or reflect the actual organization of the community. At the point that we have noticed that in some cases, those people who were formally part of the legal entity were not even people involved in the everyday management of the community. Then on the other hand, many people part of the communities were not even involved in the legal entity under a formal perspective. In this sense, it is we have also noticed a sort of a criticism which is really connected to this last point that I've just stressed out, which is basically that we have noticed that in some situation, and it has to deal with underrepresented group, such underrepresented group, most of the times, let's think about migrants, for example, are not very much included within the either formal or informal model of governance and everyday operational of these communities, but most of the time underrepresented group and minorities as conceived as mere beneficiaries of the utilities or of the services that the community uses and do. Of course, the level of representation and the level of participation of underrepresented group within commons initiatives is higher than the level of participation of underrepresented group in other reality in the world of associations, but it is true that even in the world of the commons, underrepresented groups are many times seen just as beneficiary and not always take part formally to either formally or informally to the organization. To close up to an organization on communities, what I want to say is that either formally or informally, it is true that these organizations are characterized by an extremely creative model of governance, which tend to stress a lot the idea of democracy, which is very much seen on the way the procedure to take decisions take place, which most of the times is by vast majority or unanimity decision-making processes, either formal or informal, and the existence of different groups dealing with different problems and issues. And normally it is the case in these experiences that they have an open membership in which you can also join the community just by expressing your will to do that, or by acting, carrying out act of cares for the community or for the good. With respect to organization and participation in urban policies, we really want to stress the point that it is very true or at least this is the finding of our survey, that the participation in public policies aimed at fostering commons experiences is normally higher than the participation you would find in other urban policies enacted by local administrations. So we see that this is a domain in which participation is higher, even in the sphere of public actors. However, what we have seen, and this participation, it is more in the moment of the implementation of the policy rather than in its design. Usually what happens, although of course there are differences and peculiarities, is that the implementation of the policy is really much still left to the administration or to technicians, which might be people engaged in this kind of issues and experts, while the participation is very well implemented at the implementation level. Also, we have to see under an urban policy point of view that although many times new legal tools are enacted, let's think about the regulation of the commons in Italy, most of the urban policies related to commons rely on existing legal tools, and this is, for example, the idea of what is happening in Lisbon with the BIP program, where of course legal tools were shaped around the idea of allowing existing legal tools were shaped around the idea of allowing the fostering of urban commons. Now I think we can go to the last slide, which is about what are the main and specific and general issues here. And yes, I think here we have two different sides of difficulties, and I think in this way our survey it's really consistent and sound, because which thing is proved by the fact that the difficulties and the shortfalls which have been mentioned by the the communities do mirror somehow the same shortfalls and difficulties and issues that have been mentioned by urban policies. So I think that on both sides of the relationship, public actors and communities, they fear and they feel they have the same difficulties. Coming to the communities of citizens, I think I can treat all of them together. One first big point is legal and bureaucracy and bureaucratic, in the sense that the idea of competition, which is at the cornerstone of our legal regime, or the legal regime which governs relationships between public administration and public and private actors, cannot cope with the emerging phenomenon of the commons, which is very much seen in the example of the institution of the public procurement, for example. The idea in here is that, to make the example of public procurement as the biggest example of how this logic is broken and really can create an issue with respect to the commons, well, the public procurement requires more private actors to compete in order to show who makes the most economic value out of a good. And in this way, through this procedure, the public administration can grant the control of the public good to such a community. This is not what is happening within the commons. Within the commons is an open community which takes care of a good, and it is this act of case what the public administration is looking for giving the good out and for allowing the community to take control over the good. And it's participation what really matters, and so cooperation. But here there is a legal hurdle, because the public administration willing to enact or to allow a community to take control of a commons usually finds in the difficult position of running the risk of legal liability because of the not compliance with the rules of public procurement. Many times, in fact, commons initiatives are not able to demonstrate the social value they produce is higher than the economic value that can be produced by, let's say, a parking lot or a supermarket or something like that, which would be able to pay to the public administration a street rent, which is measurable, and this is a big problem for public servants in this case, to the point that a big debate is around this, and we can go back to this. Also, the other problem is legal liability in the sense of legal responsibility when the good is public and communities are in there. Because, of course, many times these goods and these buildings are not safe or are not totally compliant with the law in terms of safety. And so many times the legal liability, if something bad happening there, remains on the public sector and on the public servant who has signed the act. This being a very big problem, because many times the implementation of a commons initiative or the possibility to regenerate urban areas through let's say common initiatives, it's somehow depending a lot on the political engagement of a public servant who, believing in the project, is willing to run a risk of legal liability. So here again we have an issue of legal regime of bureaucracy. And all these, and the last problem, of course, is again with respect to funding, because if on the one hand the commons can be somehow a solution to the lack of resources in which the administrations is, especially in Europe after the economic crisis and now after COVID-19. On the other hand, it is very difficult to find sources of funding from these experiences. And for these experiences also, which are based on informality and on cooperation rather than on formality and competition, it is many times difficult to access and to apply for regular sources of funding, which are normally based on another idea of urban development. Well, I think this is, of course, we would have many other things which we could say with respect, because the survey was very long and the actual report of the survey, it's I think 80 pages long, but I think Gru and I just have highlighted some kind of, let's say, yeah, we had tried to explain it in a nutshell, and I really hope that we can say more during the discussion and that you can react on it by saying your perspective according to your experiences, and thank you a lot.